I have with me today a Mr. Beau Scott Perkins. And is Beau, no, hold on. Is Beau actually your first name?
Yeah.
'Cause I know that people in Texas sometimes use their second name first and the first name second.
Yeah, it's pretty common. No, I'm actually a Beau.
Okay,
Yeah.
you actually are Beau. Good, because I'm going to have a David Whitworth on in a week or two, and I know that that's not his first name.
It's an
So
alias that he's going by the second name.
he's doing that Texas second name thing. So I have Beau with me. Beau is an awesome dude. I met Beau, gosh, almost 10 years ago-ish.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. When did you
Yeah.
move to Kansas City?
In 2008.
So 2008, yeah. So it would have been a while ago. And so I remember seeing this young guy, and he played the guitar like nobody else. And I was fortunate enough to be on a team with Beau, with Luke Woods. What I called that team was probably, there are people that like the Caleb Culver team, the Brad, or not Brad, my brain's farting right now. But there was a period of time where people like that team, but then there was I call the Clarks and the Flannel team. That team.
Yeah. The no delay team.
That was
like,
it was the no delay and no, funky Ableton stuff team. It was all pretty, it was all pretty whatever. And so I had the pleasure of being on a team with Beau, and it was awesome. And I think he is a great worship leader, great songwriter, great guitarist. And I'm glad that we're here with us today. Thank you for, coming and hanging out.
Yeah, absolutely. That team we were on was stellar. And I said this to you a week ago or so, but man, you're still top 5 greatest drummers to me, which was totally surprising because I had never heard you play drums until you joined that team on drums. And I was like, what? Because, I came into school and I had prayer room during your sets. And so, I liked your tattoos, and you had that rad Gretsch guitar. Yep.
I still have that Gretsch guitar right behind me.
That called the Rancher? Is that what
that's called? I think so. It's a great guitar.
It is a great guitar, but you just stood out so much. And then when Luke announced that you were going to be our drummer, we were all like, what is this? What are you doing? But dude,
why are you putting this rookie? Why are you putting this rookie on drums?
I was like, but I never expected us to have so much in common. And we had a good time, man. That's fun.
That was a great, man. I remember some of my favorite songs from Luke came out from that period. Like some of my favorite songs.
The genius of Luke Wood in that team was, instead of, being the only principal worship leader and songwriter, he just decided to stack the whole team with worship leaders and songwriters. And so we all just led one set a week, essentially. And it was really inspiring. It was a good time to write songs,
Yeah. And I just remember once a week we would get together at the practice house, and he would just be like, hey, what's everybody working on? What's everybody working on? Let's suss some stuff out. And it was I felt like it was such a safe place, because you had Mason and you and man, I just and John Scott, and it's like, wow, dude, so many great, and like you said, when you pull together a group of people that are all one super creative, 2 like really good at writing, and 3 great at collaboration. Like they're not just, I'm doing my song and here's exactly the part that I want you to play exactly. But really we're like, hey, you just pull in your part. And we kind of made this, stew. Every time we played together, it was this stew that was happening.
I think at the time, it was a rebellious, quote unquote, aesthetic for what was going on in the prayer room.
Yes.
And I had many conversations with Mike when he would be like, we're going into this cycle. I just need that minor, and you guys are doing whatever with the banjo. But yeah, I think that was the season for me when I really actually started writing songs, and invaluable, because everybody else on that team, I was sort of really new to songwriting, and those guys were so good. And there was this kind of this openness and encouragement, but also this kind of healthy bit of competition to be like, all right, we've done 3 original John Scott Young songs in the last 3 weeks. I got to get one in there, you know? But it was a good time. I think me and you tended to pull things in the prog direction.
Yeah.
On the regular.
Well, I used to say, it's like, yeah, if there was like a, you know, yeah, if there was a more progressive / kind of indie, you know, like I said, we weren't going total prog rock, but we were kind of going more that direction than maybe the just straight up folk, you know, Luke always hated it, but like the Americana, just straight Americana version, you know, we were kind of going over here.
He can't even deny that that's what we were doing. There was like a collective decision. I can't remember if it was spoken or unspoken, but it was like, no more delay pedals, no more swells.
No more swells, no more delays. Yeah,
that was like the era of Mumford, you know, all of that. And it was actually really a good, as a musician, a challenge to not lean on the things that kind of are worship tropes.
Yeah.
They're not bad, you know. Delay, I love delay, I love big reverb, but as a musician, to take that stuff away and still make a 2-hour set, you know, prophetic worship happen. You know, you kind of had to dig from a different place.
Yeah, well, that's funny because like I feel like I've heard this before, that like real artistry and creativity, it functions best in boundaries. Right? Like there's boundaries. Agree. There's boundary. If you create a boundary and say, because like the one thing an artist is so bad at, like really, is, okay, I have a blank canvas and I have all these colors. Like I have every color, I have all canvas, and now be creative. And I'm like, well, no, like I need something to spur on my creativity, or go, no, you can only use this, this, and this, and this, and done. Now be creative. And I feel like there is a freedom, and there's like that stepping board, you know, that jumping, the launch pad that you have once you have those kind of boundaries.
For me, it's actually the absence of options that pulls creativity out, because it's just basic problem solving. Like you got to get from point A to point B, and you've only got, you know, you kind of have to MacGyver it. You know,
say that quote again. Say that quote again. I like that.
It's in the absence of options that real creativity gets formed, I think. I mean, like, even like, you know, right now, I don't particularly like her music, but Billie Eilish, huge mega pop star. And from what I gather, when they were making that record, it was just her and her brother, you know, a DAW, a MIDI keyboard, and a microphone, and that was like it.
Yes.
But they're reinventing pop with this really, like, you would never guess, you know, listening to those songs. Yeah, I don't know. I don't particularly like it, but I'm old.
Well, if you're old, I'm really old. And I do remember, you know, kind of going to the pop world. Like I remember hearing a story about the artist Lorde, hearing about her, and she's very similar in that, you know, she only had like an iPhone, or she only had blah, blah, blah. And so she wrote Royals, which honestly, the thing about Royals, and if you've never heard it before, just look it up on Spotify, look it up, whatever, on YouTube. It's a really simple song that anybody could write it, and anybody could have recorded it, really. Right. And it was like, she's like, nope, I'm going to use 808. I'm going to use just one pad, and I'm going to basically just use vocals, and that's it. Right. Like that's the whole song.
Yeah. I think that as musicians, particularly songwriters, producers, it's really deceptive if you know, venture out there into YouTube land, where you get these guys and they're in these very expensive studios, but music is so subjective that way, where it's just like, really, bottom line is, if it sounds good and it moves you, it's good. It doesn't matter what, you know, preamps you used. It doesn't matter if you're, you know, played a 1956 Stratocaster on it. It's like, it just, you know, if it sounds good, it's good.
It's good. Exactly. And I think that's really funny, because like when you hear stories, you know, about people, the songs that they record, like to me, the funniest thing is I've used this person before, but the keyboardist singer, Charlie Puth, he did like you know, half of his album are voice. He called his album Voice Notes. And the reason
Yeah.
he called it Voice Notes is because almost 75% of it was recorded on voice memo and put it straight into the DAW. Like
Yeah.
he
I bought
recorded
that album on vinyl. I love that album.
and he like, for example, like, he's not a guitarist, but I remember him showing how he played one note on the guitar, recorded it on his recorded on his voice notes, put it back into the DAW, and just pitched it up and down, because he's like, that's what I can do. And the fact that, like, the accessibility and the availability, and like Luke Hendrickson on episode number 4, he talks about how we're at the greatest point where, you know, the quality of what we have in terms of creativity and what we have for tools to be creative, the quality is as high as it can get, and the cost value, the entry level, is as low as it can get. That basically we are at a place now where they've kind of met, where it's so cheap, where you can buy, you know, even then, I think, like, on your phone, on like an iPhone, or even on your, you know, computer, that you can get like a GarageBand and you can do a full record. I mean, GarageBand is better. I mean, I understand that there's tonal differences and whatever, but the flexibility of GarageBand and is better than what the Beatles had in terms of, like, the actual what you can do with it is way better. Now, I understand there's tonal qualities and this, that, and the other, but that shouldn't be an excuse for not being able to be creative, for not being able to put things down.
Yes,
but I think that a lot of people are just, they think of, oh my gosh, I don't have, you know, Every Waves plugin, or I don't have, you know, Ableton Suite. So how can I do this? Like, dude, you don't need that. You really don't. Right. Because you can get into I would say this, you know, I mean, we're kind of off track, but it doesn't matter, is that I think that when you get something like me, you know, I buy Ableton Suite, or I buy Contact, you know, Complete. Yeah. And I get an analysis paralysis because there's too many options.
Too much.
There's too many options that I tell people all the time, like, get the base thing and get used to doing it, and use that limitation to get better at it and go for it. But yeah, I think I think that specifically this whole conversation is like, hey, don't be, you know, don't think that you can't do it, right? That you don't have enough resource. And then also, like, no, use those disadvantages, those boundaries, as the point to launch off of.
Yeah. And I think the other thing from a songwriting perspective is that because we're in that space, it really puts the heft of engagement back on the song, and the quality of the song, and the creativity that goes into, you know, whatever's actually going in. Yeah. And that's something I'm super trying to explore right now with my own music. So
yes. Yeah. And in the last episode, I think with Katie Reed, she talked about the idea of finding those intervals, finding those melodies, finding those hooks. Those are the things that she's really working on trying to find. She's always looking for that hook. She's always looking for that thing. You know, even when she's doing Spontaneous, I'm always looking for that one little thing that pulls you back in, that everybody remembers, you know. And I think that that is, you know, I think where a lot of people are, is trying to find that. So let's go backwards. So how did you get started in, like, you know, how did you get started in, like, worship music? Where'd you come from? And kind of bring us up to date a little bit.
Yeah. So I'm from Amarillo, Texas, which is in the West Texas region. It's like, if you know what Texas looks like, it's on the box on top, right in the middle. I grew up in the Church of Christ. Yeah. So for those of you that don't know, in that denomination, there's no instruments. So yeah. Please turn to page 175.
And they use the pitch pipe, baby. I know. I've been to many services.
So, which was a drag for a pretty, like, you know, musical kid from an early age, but you know, just kind of fast forward, I West Texas football, the whole deal. When I was a teenager, my folks split, and I really rebelled, you know, became a stoner. I started playing guitar when I was 10. So in high school, it was just, there was a kind of this resurgence of rock and roll that happened, and several venues were open in my town. So I spent every Friday and Saturday night playing shows or watching my friends play shows. And then, got introduced to drugs, the whole thing. But the summer after my junior year, I had an encounter with the Lord at a youth camp. And I had not, because I grew up where I grew up, I had no touchstone for Christian music. Like, my parents were very musical and they played music in the house, but I didn't know, like, I missed Delirious. I missed Stephen Curtis Chapman. I missed DC Talk. I missed all that stuff. And, but the summer after my junior year, when I was 17, I just had this encounter with God. We were at this church camp, and every night we would go. I would sit on the back row with all my kind of hardcore, crusty friends. But the music would start, and I would feel the presence of God, and I didn't know what it was, and I didn't have language for it then. But I would just be moved. I felt like at home, in the music. And that was kind of the first place that I started to encounter God. And then the last night, the guy that was leading the camp called me out, had a word of knowledge. It was a huge camp, maybe 2,000 kids.
Oh, wow.
Really specific word for me. And the Lord set me free from depression and drug addiction, like right then.
Wow.
And so the summer before my senior year was just like my whole, thing got shaken up. So my dad had remarried, and the lady that he had remarried was very charismatic. My dad got filled with the Spirit in that summer as well. And my stepmom started to teach me about Holy Spirit and started to teach me. It was hilarious, dude. I would come home from school and there would be 5, 40-year-old women laying on the floor listening to Leonard Jones. I was just listening to his episode on your podcast. And they would just be like, come on. And so my after school activities became soaking with middle-aged women.
Come on, man.
The first time she took me to a conference, and she went up, and she was the first one up there, and I think it was Bobby Connors prayed for her, and she fell out. I flipped. I was running up there, and I was saying this to security guards. I was like, you gotta help me. You gotta help. We gotta pick her up. And she was like, it's fine. It's fine. Just calm down. So I didn't know any of that stuff, but we found a new church home, Trinity Fellowship Church in Amarillo, which is a really amazing spirit-filled church there. And I just found my place, kind of volunteering. And it was just this crazy season where my whole senior year was basically just dedicated to this new pursuit I'd found, which it became a pursuit of Jesus, and I discovered Kevin Prosh. Do you know Kevin? Kevin.
Do I know Kevin Prosh?
Right. It's amazing how many people don't. It's kind of
no. There's tons of people. No, Kevin Prosh is. I tell there are people that say this all the time. Like, he is the OG. He's one of the OGs, man. He's one of the originals. Like, honestly, like, if you in Leonard Jones' episode, he says that Kevin, besides Phil Driscoll was the first guy. The second guy he said that he ever did that with was Kevin Prosh.
Absolutely.
And most influential to Leonard Jones was Kevin Prosh.
That's wild.
That's insane.
Well, I didn't know who he was. So I joined the worship team at my church at Trinity, and I was playing guitar, and that was different too. I was learning how to play in a different style because I had just been like chugging and wheezing and doing guitar play.
Yeah.
And so I have found these friends that were they were going after God in a really radical way too. And they said to me, hey man, you have to come with us over to this other church and hear this worship leader. He's amazing. And I was like, great. So on a Sunday morning, I remember we played the 9:00 service, and we walked off stage, got in the car, drove across town, walked into more church where Kevin was leading. And, Kevin had a keyboard, and he had
toys on it,
trolls, and he had he's firing loops,
He had
and
everything.
playing
Yeah.
guitar, and he literally did not play a song.
No.
Like, there was, for me, from my mind, I was like, when's the chorus coming? And the whole thing was like a chorus.
Yes.
And it lasted forever. And, I just had no grid, no concept. And I was like, okay. So I went back several times because it was such an odd thing for me.
Yes.
And as a previous stoner, I was like, this seems like music stoners could get really into.
Yeah.
But not, and I don't mean that in a disparaging way,
No.
but in
This
the
seems
sense
more
that
like the middle part of this seems like the middle set or the second set of a Grateful Dead concert.
absolutely,
This
yeah,
is not like a worship Sunday. This is like second set, where first set was all the songs, and then they did
yes.
the drum world, the drum odyssey thing or whatever they call it. And then they do second set, where second set was just kind of like, start playing.
But we were doing like, what we were doing, whatever was popular at the time. Tomlin, New Life Worship was big,
Yes.
and that stuff, which was great songs. And then this was like off the beaten path. No one was talking about it, but the people that were in it and the people that were in the congregation were having a great time. And I could feel the presence of God in both of them,
Yeah.
And so Kevin was like my gateway worship leader to IHOP World. And I'm like a really I'm not really into sports, but I have music nerd addiction. So, I don't want to just know what the albums are. I need to know who produced it and who played on it. So for me, IHOP World was like a big, it was like my fantasy football league. I had to know who was there, what it was about. And then IHOP was such a foreign thing to me too. 24/7, I didn't get it. The theology was like, I had never even, and so the long and short of it was,
and the thing about the theology at IHOP is there's so much of it. Meaning you're like, oh,
right.
it's just prayer stuff. No. Oh, it's just Jesus stuff. No. Oh, it's just Holy Spirit stuff. No. Oh, it's just prayer stuff. No. Oh, it's just end time stuff. No. It's such a big, breadth of information that you're like, if you're not used to it, there's so much.
Well, and back then, at church, no one was talking about the book of Joel or the book of Zechariah, but I had never cracked those books open in my life anyway. I remember reading Revelation one time when I was 12 at church camp and just being like, just going to save that. And so the summer after my senior year came and, people were going off to college, and my sister actually my stepsister ended up at Bethel School of Supernatural Ministry. But I wasn't ready to pull the trigger. I didn't know. I was still on the fence about IHOP and didn't really know what that was. And so I decided to work that year. So I went to the local community college. I worked at the church part-time as a musician, and then I was working at the Gap, and I was a shipment manager. And so I would just get there early and receive shipment and unload it and then, populate the store. But what that did is it gave me an opportunity in those days to get, Mike's box sets of CDs.
So many of them.
So many, but like, I remember really when his Song of Solomon series, like, messed me up. And I would be back there like folding sweaters, like, yeah, just like my coworkers would show up and they're like, dude, are you cool? I'm like, he loves me so much,
Which, by the way, if you're listening to this and you've never heard any of Mike Bickle's teaching or any teaching on like Song of Solomon, if that sounds kind of weird to you, like strange to you, I would encourage you just looking it up and slowly going through it, because I feel like that there's, growing up in charismatic world, in the charismatic world, I remember being a 4 or 5-year-old going to like Women's Aglow meetings every week. And the same thing, like this is in the 80s, like early 80s, like late 70s, early 80s. And I remember going to Women's Aglow meetings and same thing, ladies being falling out and, being very charismatic. And, but I remember the Song of Solomon being a real, thing even back then in the 80s. When Mike figured it out, it was already, full blown in the Women's Aglow women's ministry area. And I think that now it's not as bad, but back then it was like, even Mike said, well, this is for the women's ministry. This Song of Solomon stuff is for the ladies. It's for the women's ministry.
Right.
But I tell men all the time, like, no, there are truths in this that will really help you. And it will give you confidence to be loved by God and give you confidence to love God and love people. And really, if you understand concepts and if you understand the truth in Song of Solomon, it will help. It's not a lovey-dovey, just emotional-ish kind of thing. It's not just a sentimental thing. It's actually a real life thing. And, and the way that Mike puts it, the son of an Olympic boxer, he really does help kind of as this, tough guy, bring out the truths of the Song of Solomon in a way that doesn't feel like, just, girly. And I really did appreciate that.
Yeah, or pandering, he doesn't. But what I love about those teaching, and I haven't kind of dove back into it in some years, but really getting it at 18, 19, 20 when you're not married, you're emotionally not quite developed. I feel like there was this kind of window for it to bypass. I'm 31 today. Today's my birthday.
Hey, happy birthday.
Thank you. And today, I think if that had been introduced to me for the first time, I'd have a harder time getting into it. But I think like the Song of Solomon is confronting, and I think that, I know we're not kind of talking about this, but
we're talking about whatever you want. We're having a conversation. This is good.
I think for masculinity to be true and healthy, it needs to be confronted with the bridal paradigm.
Correct.
I think it breeds a gentleness and a faithfulness into true masculinity when you understand that, when you can somehow touch or conceptualize or just dip your toe into this idea that you are adored, in your mess, in your whatever. And I was really thankful for it then. And so I got into all that basically.
Yes. No, that's so good. Especially, I mean, we're in a, wherever you stand on the subject, the idea of gender and sexuality and all the different, I mean, that's such a huge question now in terms of, I think especially there's a war on masculinity specifically because there has been such a bad example and a bad understanding. I remember specifically Mike talking about how that the Lord said he was going to change the expression and the understanding of the church in one generation, that a generation of people would change that. And I remember your who's past father-in-law, Bob, one of the first, your father-in-law was the one that gave Rachel and I wedding. He gave us our marriage counseling. And I love Bob Faulkner. Bob Faulkner is awesome, and I love him. And he helped me out of so many pits that I had been in during my marriage. I love the man. I am eternally grateful for him. And, he used to tell me, he would say that I believe that the understanding and expression of Christianity, the first place that it will change in how we understand it and how the world perceives it is first in family, and specifically in husbands.
Yeah.
How men act, but what they believe about themselves and how they express themselves and how the world perceives us. And I'm telling you, specifically Bob Faulkner demonstrated this so well, that there was, like you said, he was a tough, I really do. I was like, he's a tough guy. He's a construction worker. He's this guy, but he was the most gentle, kind, loving, tender, approachable,
Right.
guy. When he needed to be tough, he would be. But the
Right.
idea of that he put forth this and demonstrated that, and I see that specifically when we see Jesus, how he acts as the King of Kings, Lord of Lords, the man of war, but how
Yeah.
he treats his beloved in gentleness and even in humility, and just the way that he shows us as an example. We see in Hebrews that or Peter says he's an example for us, that we see in the Song of Solomon, the example of how husbands, and specifically, this is how masculinity is. This is true masculinity,
Yeah.
right? It's
I
not
think
saying
that,
masculinity is bad. It's saying, no,
no, you're
what
right.
is true masculinity? Being a father, being a husband, being a brother, being a son, being a friend, whatever that looks like. How do we bring that forth? And I think that true authenticity, and I think honestly, like, I know that we're on this rabbit trail, but I really do believe that even in the place of music, this is going to change. That will change music. Like, it'll change creativity. It'll change expression. It changes everything when that
Right.
truth is real.
I think, since we're on this rabbit trail, I think that right now, the word that you said that pinged me is tenderness, right?
Mm,
That was something that when I got to IHOP, I was very concerned with, in the sense that I'm from West Texas, and I'm an artsy fartsy kid, the son of two great athletes. And, football is king here. And now I live in a community of farmers, and getting to the prayer community, and there was a lot of tenderness, and there was a high value on tenderness.
mm-hmm.
And I think that that's something that there is a war in our culture against tenderness, and it's being swapped for this kind of false acceptance, tolerance.
Mm-hmm.
Tenderness is true. Tolerance is perverted. Tolerance doesn't care about you at all. Tenderness will move toward you in love and leave a boundary,
Mm-hmm.
and that's how Bob was, and he would move toward you in love, but he was not a guy whose boundaries were changing.
Mm-hmm.
He was not a guy whose principles were up in the air, and you weren't ever in question about what he thought on an issue, but toward people,
Mm-hmm.
because the word says that we don't wrestle with flesh and blood, but with powers and principalities.
Yes.
I don't think that true love doesn't wage war against people,
No.
but tolerance is not an acceptable exchange for tenderness, I think. And I think that that's something that when you engage with the Lord as the bridegroom, tenderness gets into you while his boundaries get established in you at the same time.
Mm.
And I think that, yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's
Yeah.
great. And I think, it's funny because, I have 3 or 4 passages that I like, 3 or 4 things that when I'm training, specifically like prayer room trainings, prophetic singing training, spontaneous worship, I have people read through Song of Solomon, like
Yep.
selected passages, Song of Solomon. I do Psalm 23, Psalm 45, and then hymns of Revelation. And I do all of them at the same time because I go, these 3 aspects, like the Psalm 45 that has the bridegroom, king, and judge kind of,
Right.
all of it mixed in. If you do Song of Solomon, if you do the hymns of Revelation, and you do Psalm 45, you'll see how they all play together, and they actually help. They help each other. They give each other more weight. Like they actually help develop one another. And it's funny because like you'll hear people go, "Oh my gosh!" Like the language that I use in Song of Solomon is really helping me with Psalm 45. Is really helping me when I sing through the Book of Revelation, through like the hymns, the 13 different songs that we know for a fact are in the Book of Revelation. But yeah,
build your vocabulary like
yeah,
that.
and build your vocabulary. And I kind of getting back to it, I think the 2 things that specifically hinder us in creativity, but I think specifically in prophetic and spontaneous as well, but specifically in prophetic utterance, our limitations are just with our one, our proficiency at our instrument, right?
Yep.
Our musical proficiency, but then it's also our biblical literacy. Like those two
Right.
things, being able to express it with my instrument, but being able to have the lens by which my thoughts and my feelings and my everything is kind of put through. You know what I mean? It's put through that lens or that mesh or that filter of the Word of
Yeah.
God. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's clear, it's clarified. Okay, so you were in, you saw Kevin Prosh, you listened to Mike Bickle's teachings, and what
Yeah.
then led you to Kansas City?
So I attended one thing that year. Alan had preached on the Forerunner. Never really felt called to that. I
Mm-hmm.
think that my expression of that or understanding of that's changed a lot over the past 10 years. But anyway, that pretty much set me on the path to go. I gotta go. I gotta move there. And I didn't really have. College was not a thing that I was super interested in. I just wanted to pursue Jesus.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't looking for a job or a vocation. I just like all I wanted at that. I was just radical. I was a radical 18-year-old. So a friend of ours, Marcus Meyer, is from my hometown. We met up for the first time. I ended up marrying his sister-in-law. So now we're family. That's weird, but we met. He was all about it. I ended up moving to Kansas City. I was going to jump in IHOPU into their theology program. It had so many names. I have no idea what it was called. It ended up being apostolic preaching at year 4, but I mean,
it's changed. It's changed every other year. It changes to something else, and the person directing it changes. No, it's just the way it works.
Yeah, it's the way of the program, I guess. But those were some of the best years of my life. In my second year, the awakening happened. The student awakening that really shaped me. So when I moved to IHOP, because I had been playing so much, Marcus kind of got some corners cut for me, and I ended up joining Tim Reimher's team like week 2 of being on the missions base.
Yeah,
which made me a ton of friends in school, obviously, because I broke all the rules. But
I did this. I did the same thing.
Did you?
Yeah, I had some people cut the. I still had to audition, but still, it was like I think I was there not even 2 weeks.
Yeah.
In my internship.
My audition was Marcus called me at like 2:00 on a Tuesday afternoon, and you know how he is. He's like, "Hey, buddy.
Hey, hi.
How are you, man? What are you doing in the next 30 minutes?" I'm like, homework, not much. And he's like, well, can you get your pedal board and your guitar and head up to the multi-purpose room? I was like, yeah. And he's like, okay, I'll meet you there. That was the conversation. I didn't know what I was going for. So I walk in the room, and Cassie Campbell's on bass, Corey Asbury's on the drums, Ashley Pryor sitting there with the guitar, and Misty and a couple other worship leaders are like in this panel. And they're like, oh, you're the guy from Amarillo. And I'm like, yeah. And they had me audition right there. And thankfully, I was good enough. And literally 30 minutes later, Tim, he was home in
Minnesota. No, Alaska.
He's from Alaska. He was home in Alaska. So he called me from Alaska. I was like, hey man, Marcus said you're in, and you want to join my team? And then my first set was the next morning at 6 a.m. with Joanna May was leading. And
Joanna May. She's bomb.com, man.
She's amazing. And it was just a trial by fire, I jumped on the team, and we were doing 6 a.m.s. And that just became my world for 2 years, and really, honestly, that team grew me a lot in my musicianship. I was still really sloppy, and I still didn't really understand from the electric guitar how to dynamically. I was still playing very much rock.
Yeah.
So just a lot of big chords. I never stopped playing ever. And Tim really helped me in that.
Because the thing that people don't know about Tim is an incredible electric. player. Just
Yes.
just if he only played electric guitar, he'd be good enough to be on a team. Just electric.
Oh,
I remember when I first
easy.
one of not the first time, but when Tim first got there, I remember seeing him play electric for somebody. This was before Merchant Band. This is before Marcus had a team. That Tim was playing electric, and I'm thinking, dude, this guy is stinking good at electric. Like, he's just a good electric. And then I saw him lead, and I'm like, what? I thought he was just an electric guy.
Yeah, absolutely. And he would literally in rehearsal come over to me and he would show me exactly what he wanted me to play.
Yeah.
Which in those days I had never had anybody do that. And there were no worship tutorials. There was no YouTube. There was the way I learned to play guitar is I would stand in front of my my boombox with my amp on the floor, and I would start and stop tapes.
Yep.
And
Play the
just
parts
by ear, try to play the parts. And Tim really he helped me understand that there is this finesse, this other thing, that sometimes what you're not playing is as important as what you are playing, and how electric guitar could fit in a mix dynamically, where you're not just rocking and rocking and rocking and rocking and rocking.
Yeah.
And so that was a big credit to me.
Yeah.
He really helped me understand the instrument a lot better.
Well, you know what? Let's camp there for a second. What were probably like two or three things that, like, right off the bat, you're like, these three things, like actual technical things, as opposed to, like, I know you said one of them, which was, hey, like, making space. Like, you don't have to be playing the whole time. You don't have to rock the whole time. But what are maybe some two or three other things, like practical things that somebody who's playing, I know there's so many YouTube things, but what are some practical things that you would say, hey, for a worship electric guitarist, these were the two or three things that he kind of really pulled out for me, that I would suggest you trying, or at least practicing with?
Well, through the course of being on Tim's team, there was different iterations. And I think that one huge one was there's a huge difference between being the only electric guitar player and being one of two. And I think that really these days, I prefer to be just me, because I've got all this sonic space that I can take up however I want. And these days, that's what I prefer. But even when I got on Luke's team, I would say for that team, I became like the best rhythm guitar player that I knew, which for that team was different. But when Tim, really took me under his wing, one thing I would say was just chord shapes and expressions.
Hold on a second.
Yeah, I think that the thing that Tim taught me was to think about the song holistically, and not to think about showing off. I mean, or being the main instrument. And like in those days on Tim's team and in the IHOP world, like a lot of the teams were keyboard driven. And you had like Truman and Michael Sorgi and Caleb Culver, obviously, and those guys were a band in and of themselves in a lot of ways.
They could hit one note on Omnisphere, and it would be
orchestra.
An orchestra.
Yeah. So at first that annoyed me, because I was like, we got to make the electric guitar great again. But as I grew as a player, I realized that gives you a lot of interesting opportunities when you're not, because I think like ostensibly rock music is carried by guitars.
Mm-hmm.
So the guitars are never not happening. But worship was changing, and I think now with EDM and a lot of music, even pop music, guitars has become a secondary instrument. And what that allows is for some really interesting takes on texture, color, and dynamics. So Tim taught me a lot about dynamics. He has songs where it was just it would be just, hey, just do swells, triads, play higher, listen to what sonic space the keyboard is occupying and get above that, and I
Mm-hmm.
think, or below that, depending, and trying to think through, you only have so much sonic space, and the drums and bass are taking up the low end, and really your keyboards and guitars, which are the driving melodic instruments in any band, are taking up all of the mids,
Yeah.
the mid, the high mids. And so Tim gave me a real great appreciation for chord voicings. So
Mm-hmm.
different chordal shapes that would play off of what someone else in the band is playing.
Mm.
And so just playing around with those, I mean, because you can play, a D chord, 9 different ways, and they all sound different. They have a different emotion behind them. And
Yes.
so you slap some reverb and delay on that. If you're the only guitar player in the band, when you make your presence known and how you make your presence known can add a lot of dynamic to
Yes.
what's being played.
Yes.
And so with Tim, it was really just like, you're not the main attraction, which was the first thing to get, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
Tim, another thing I loved about him, and he didn't say this for his benefit, but for ours, the team who he was training, he would say, your job is to make the worship leader look like a genius. And I've carried that. And I think that's the best way to come in, the best attitude, I think, to come in as being a musician on any team is, I mean, so that's the attitude, but then the practical of it was, man, get in the practice space and try a bunch of different chord voicings.
Mm-hmm.
Push yourself to find a different way to say the same thing that stands out from, what somebody else is playing. And then I think when I joined Luke's team, that was different because John Scott, as a guitar player, blew me away, just in terms of like how he could play the guitar. But with my background being in Tim's world, I think what I tried to bring was some glue between, and there were just more people on Luke's team. So there was more going on.
And that's the thing that I think people maybe don't realize is that we had 2 electrics, 2 keyboardists, an acoustic guitar, drums, and we also had sometimes, I mean, besides the singers, we would sometimes have strings, or I remember sometimes we just have, just so much going on. But I think, that's funny that, I think the more instruments you have, the less everyone can play. Like in an orchestra, like if you have like a chamber orchestra, 3 or 4 or 5 pieces, they all can play more than if you're playing like a full blown symphony orchestra where, you may have a section of violins that actually will only be able to play one note. So thanks for being with us, Beau. And how can people follow you? Like, what's your social handles? How can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, so my Instagram handle is Beau, BEAU _ Scott, SCOTT _ Perkins. And you can find my wife and I's music on all streaming platforms, Beau and Mercy Perkins.
Awesome.
And we've got 3 or 4 singles coming out before the end of the year.
Awesome. I'll make sure to put those in the show notes.
Awesome.
That's great. So if you've been watching the video portion of this, I would like you to go in the comments and put a timestamp on your favorite part, like the favorite little snippets and stuff that that you really liked. Like, hey, I really like that quote or whatever. Timestamp it for me. That'll be awesome. And what I want you to do right now is, if you are watching this, I want you to go over to Spotify. I want you to go over to Apple Podcasts. I want you to go over to Stitcher and listen to the rest. So you are going to have to go over there right now.
If you've enjoyed the podcast, think about giving it a review or 5 stars, a like, or a share. For more information, visit modernpsalmist.com.